Hello, and welcome to FTA Collective. My name is Chase Parker. Today we are going to be looking at how to camera track inside of Blender. Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, you're going to want to open a new project inside of Blender. Then you're going to go over and open the video editing tab. After that, you're going to want to click on the add button next to the timeline and import your footage. So as you can see, our timeline is a little bit short for our footage. So in the bottom right, we are going to adjust that so we have the correct number of frames to match the length of our footage. For my specific case, 488 frames was perfect. Then we're going to adjust some settings with our image. We're going to render out our footage as an image sequence. So we are going to make a new folder in our computer that we are going to put the images into. I just call it image sequence. Inside the folder, we are going to name our file. I like to put an underscore at the end of my file name because the images will be exported with numbers next to them and it makes organization very easy. Next, you're going to set your image file format to a type that you desire. I picked TIFF. The reason I chose the TIFF format is because it is a bigger file and you get more data and the images usually come out more crisp with less compression needed. You're going to want to make sure that you turn off compression. That way you get the highest quality image. Next, in our render settings, we're going to go down to the color management tab. By default, this will be set to sRGB and standard. You're going to want to make sure that it is at these settings. Next, we're going to want to make sure that our output is at the desired frame rate. For this specific tutorial, I had mine at 30 FPS, but if you shot yours at 24 FPS, 25 FPS, whatever FPS, just set it to that. All right, now we can go ahead and render. You're gonna go hit render and click render animation. All right, now that our animation is finished rendering, we're gonna wanna open a new Blender project from scratch. The reason we do this is because we don't really need that video editing part. We just need the image sequence. So having a new project just gives us a clean slate to work off of. Then we're gonna open a new tab under VFX and motion tracking. All right, now that we're in the motion tracking page, I like to clean it up to my liking. That means just getting rid of the dope sheet and closing down some of the windows. All right, now we're gonna go to the folder holding our image sequence and open it inside of Blender. All right, so on import, things are gonna be a little bit funky. So first things first, we're gonna go into our render settings and set our correct frame rate because it will default to 24 FPS. And as you remember, we exported at 30 FPS. Next, we're gonna go to output and color management. You'll notice that it put in a strange view transform. So we're just gonna change that back to what we had it before. Next on the sidebar, we are going to adjust some settings there as well. If you don't see this menu, press N on your keyboard and it should pop up. So under the footage settings, we're going to change a few things. If you know your camera's color space, you're going to want to put it in here. I shot this on iPhone, so that is going to be in Rec 2020. If you don't know this, just leave it at sRGB. More times than not, it should be fine. But if you do know it, then you're going to want to put it in here. All right, so now that we can set up our tracking, we're gonna wanna go and click Set Scene Frames. What this does is just make it so that our scene is the perfect amount of our frames. So for this example, we had 488 frames, so it's going to set our timeline to 488. Then we also wanna click on Prefetch. What this does is it just kind of does like a pre-render of your footage so that it plays back smoother because we want that smooth playback. Couple things to note about camera tracking is that there is a pattern size and a search size. The pattern size is basically Blender going frame by frame looking for the same pattern in a scene. So for example, if we have a place of high contrast, say a black dot on a white piece of paper, that black dot is going to be our pattern. The pattern size will try to look for that black dot every frame moving forward. The search size is very similar. It is the area in which Blender will look for that pattern between frames. So every time that pattern moves, if it's inside of the search size, Blender will try to find it and set the pattern to that tracker, if that makes sense. In terms of size, what to size your pattern and search size, it'll vary from project to project. Generally, the default has been okay for me. But say you have a really fast moving shot, you're going to want to crank those up. Or if you have a really steady shot that just has like some subtle jitters, you can bring these really slow. But again, the default usually works fine for me. So the shot that I'm using in this example is a little bit faster. So I did end up cranking up the pattern and search size. So that's kind of an example of use case. Okay, so the next setting we're going to look at is the motion model. To be honest, I don't really know how to explain the motion model that well, but from what I understand, it's basically the algorithm that Blender uses to detect what kind of movement the shot is. So there is a location, location rotation, location rotation scale, perspective, and affine. So location is a little bit self-explanatory. It'll have the trackers look at a location. This is perfect for things like tripod shots, or like if you're standing still with your camera and not moving, you're only moving left and right on a two-dimensional axis. Location rotation is good if your camera is like rotating like this, as you may guess. I've never had to use location rotation scale, but I can imagine it tracks things as they get bigger and smaller. Perspective is a really good all around. It looks at the, you guessed it, perspective of a shot. So basically, if you're moving in 3D space, getting different angles, all that kind of stuff, it will be good for that. Affine, I think that it checks the skew. So say like you have something that's stretching, like you're tracking something that's stretching, Affine accommodates for that. I usually leave my motion model for on perspective or affine for all tracks, because I find that those work the best for the kinds that I do. I don't really do a lot of tripod shots. I do a lot of like moving around in 3D space. So those two work for me. Affine takes the longest to calculate. However, I get the best results with it. Next setting, you're going to want to change match to previous frame. The reason we do this is because previous frame looks for how the pattern looks in the previous frame, whereas keyframe tries to look for the pattern based on how it is in the first frame that you tracked. So say, for example, you have a cube that's more elongated like a rectangle. If you look at it straight on, it's going to look more like a cube. However, if as you move to the side, it'll start to look more and more like rectangular. And if it's on the previous frame, it'll accommodate that every frame going forward. But if you keep it on the keyframe, it'll keep looking for that cube shape and it'll mess up your track. So that's why we put it on the previous frame option. Pre-pass, you want to leave that checked, and then you want to turn on normalize. What normalize does is it checks the lighting values. If you have changing light values in your scene, it'll try to guess the changes in light and keep a smooth track. I like to keep this on in all cases just because I find it works really well, but that's what it's for. Under tracking settings extra, we are going to change the correlation to 0.9. Basically, what this does is it is the threshold for how hard Blender will look for a pattern every frame. So if it doesn't hit that threshold of 90%, it won't move on to the next frame and that track will be finished. This is really good for getting a solid track every single frame. But the less this number is, the less hard Blender tries to hold onto a track. So obviously you can get a little bit sliding from that, which is not good. And then I find that 0.9 is really good because any higher, Blender doesn't like to hold on to any tracks. So 0.9 is a good 90% mark for the threshold. All right. Finally, after we got all those out of the way, we are going to do what I like to call the brute force method. And basically what that is instead of putting trackers individually, which you can do, you put a shit ton of trackers and get rid of the ones that aren't so good until you have your desired result. And just as a warning, this is pretty hard on your computer. However, if you just wait for a long time, it will eventually work. The other option is Blender needs 8 trackers. So if you just put those in manually, you can get to it eventually. But if you want to have a solid track every single time, this is a good method to follow. I am doing this on a laptop, so obviously it's a little bit slower for me, but it still works. So when you have all of your settings set up, you're going to click the detect features option and a bunch of trackers will show up. All right, so after we hit detect features, a little drop down will show up, and we are going to want to open that. In this area, we are going to want to change the threshold to 0.01. What this setting does is it changes what Blender considers to be high contrast and low contrast. So it'll find more points in the scene that it can hold on to, which makes it easier because the more tracks, the better. Next, we're going to change the distance value to 80. What this does is it makes it so that trackers have the ability to be within 80 pixels of each other. This just, again, makes it so that more trackers can be on the scene. All right, so now we get to the actual tracking of the camera. We are going to want to go to frame 1 of our scene and click the track forward button. This will track it as far as it can into the scene with all the trackers. Don't worry if all of your trackers die. We'll get back to that in a little bit. Next, what we're going to want to do is go to the end of the scene and then detect features again and then track backwards. So now this one should usually go all the way to the back. If it doesn't, that's totally fine because we're going to add more trackers. So now go to the center of your scene and track forward or backwards. It doesn't really matter. Just remember what frame that you were on. So for my example, I was at frame 259. So I remembered that number and then I tracked backwards. Then I went back to frame 259 and tracked forwards. And at this point, you should have trackers all the way throughout your scene. And now we get to the pain in the ass that is solving your camera. But I'll hold your hand through it so you don't have to worry about it. If you had a really good track, you don't really need to worry about this part. However, if you'll notice in my dope sheet, we have some green and red lines that are kind of sticking out of that general sort of mush of graphical spaghetti, if you will. Before we solve our camera, we're gonna want to go through and clean this up. What this is, they are unsteady tracks that kind of tracked onto something that doesn't really stand still. So they kind of move off on your own. So just go through and delete these, as many as you can, the more the better. But you want to keep the bulk of them intact. Okay, so next we're going to go into the solve tab and we're going to put a couple of settings in here and then we're going to solve our camera and that will make our camera in 3D space. First, we're going to go over to the track settings and we're going to change our camera options. For this, I left all of this blank because I actually don't know the sensor width or the lens on an iPhone. But if you don't either, fret not. There is a option so that Blender will figure it out for you. However, if you want a absolutely 100% perfect track and you do know these options, you're going to want to put them in here. So for all of my friends that don't know theirs, under Refine, you're going to want to click Focal Length, Optical Center, and Radial Distortion. This is just so that Blender will figure it out for you. The next thing we want to do is set our keyframes, our keyframe A and keyframe B. What these do is they are the areas between the most parallax in the shot. Parallax is basically the amount of extreme movement. That's the best way I can think of explaining it right now. So for example, if you're moving from left to right really fast, you're going to want to go from the frame of where you start doing that to the frame to roughly where you ended doing that. You can scrub back and forth between your timeline. The long blue lines are kind of the general most parallax. So you're just going to go to the points from when those are the longest. For me, my keyframe A was 169 and my keyframe B was 354. All right, so finally we are going to solve our camera. This will take a little bit depending on your computer specs, but usually it doesn't take too long. So you're just going to want to hit solve motion and wait for it to spit out a pixel error. The pixel error we want to be under 1. That is a really good pixel error, especially if you're watching it on smaller screens. But the lower the pixel error, the better. The pixel error is basically how much the camera is sliding around based on how it actually was. So for my first solve, I got a 110 pixel error. So as you can imagine, that is nowhere close to 1. So that was a really bad track. This part of the process is actually where I gave up a lot on camera tracking. But I luckily found a method that helps you clean up your track and get a lower and lower solve error, and I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, so basically under the drop down that says cleanup, you're going to want to open that, and you're going to press clean tracks. Another pop-up will appear, and you are going to change the reprojection error to a little bit above the amount of your pixel solve error. The reason you want to get a little bit above your pixel solve error is because it'll get rid of the tracks that cause that average error. Obviously, the more you get rid of, the better. However, I learned that if you get rid of too much at a time, this camera solve gets pretty messed up and actually doesn't seem to do much better. So after you've selected your points, you're gonna go and delete them. Don't worry if it deletes a lot, that's totally okay, as long as you have plenty left. If you don't have plenty left, then you're just gonna wanna click back on that reprojection error. So as you can see, after I did that, my solve error got to a 0.82, which is under 1. So that's a really good camera track. However, we can get it even lower. So we're gonna repeat this process a couple more times, again, just skimming off the top of the reprojection error until we get to a result that doesn't change much. Again, you don't wanna get rid of too many tracks because the Blender needs at least 8 to have a solid camera track, but it's better to have a few good tracks than a lot of bad tracks. So we're just gonna keep skimming off the top until we have a pixel error that we're happy with. All right, now that we have a solve error that we are happy with, we're gonna finally do the fun part and set up our scene. So you're gonna wanna click set up background and set up tracking scene. What this does is basically make a preset for Blender to set up how a camera tracking scene should be. So now if we pull down our 3D viewport, we'll see that there's been a bunch of stuff added to our scene. However, one thing you'll notice right off the bat is that it is lined up absolutely horribly. So on the floor of our video, we're gonna wanna click 3 different points, usually in the shape of a right angle triangle. I don't really know why this is, but apparently it works the best. So I'm gonna follow the experts and do that. So this will set up our floor plane so that it's level with the floor. Next thing we're going to want to do is click a point and set it as the origin. This is usually a good idea for if you want to have an object in that specific point. You want to click on the origin and then it will have the origin of your 3D scene be around that point. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to click on 2 points on your scene and you're going to set the scale of your scene. This stumped me for a really long time until I saw someone actually camera track, and I noticed that you can use a slider and adjust it manually. So you're gonna click the 2 points and you're gonna click set scale, and then you're gonna change the size of the default cube until it looks right in your scene. As a reference, the default cube is a 1 meter square cube. So you're going to want to set it to the size so it would be roughly about 1 meter squared in your real world environment. This part is really important if you are compositing something into a 3D scene that you need to have scaled correctly. The last thing you're going to want to do is set the X and Y axis of your scene. To be totally honest, I don't really know how to effectively do this, but I do know that the X-axis is left and right and the Y-axis is forward and backwards. So you're just going to want to click on points and set Y-axis or X-axis until it's kind of along those axes relative to how you move the camera. And there you have it. Now you can put whatever you want in your scene and it should be moving correctly with your camera. Thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, my name is Chase Parker at FTA Collective. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. It really helps us out and lets us know that you want more videos. But until next time, have a good one.